Some might argue that the most dangerous thing in Bannerlord multiplayer is the sinking pit of depression caused by expectations versus reality. And they might be right. But given cavalry can one-shot even the most heavily armoured troops in multiplayer, a problem with their audio design might give dedicated Bannerlord sufferers some alternative ideas. Doomslayer that I am, I've identified 3 aspects that I think contribute to the cavalry sound problem. And perhaps the most frustrating thing of all is that they all seem relatively easy to fix. Like, insultingly easy. Like, it's been 5 years and we don't give a fuck about multiplayer type easy. But let's look at examples for each of them before we look at these aspects in further detail. Sound occlusion is basically when something is blocking the source of a noise, causing a sound shadow. This example speaks for itself. The horses obviously have advanced silencing dampeners on their legs, but only when they're behind an obstacle. To see how ridiculous this is, let's have a look at the sound wave and listen to it again. I think it's also worth showing the second clip, where I don't think there should have been any sound occlusion because the arch behind me was open. In this case, there was no trace of cavalry sound until the moment that I was killed, and I can only assume that it's a bug. I wouldn't be surprised if this bug was responsible for half of the frustration with the cav sound. Unless the devs intend for the cav to be a jump scare element, there's probably 99 ways to reduce the impact of poorly implemented sound occlusion in multiplayer. Probably the quickest solution is to bring across the sound occlusion option toggle from campaign mode, which has been disabled in multiplayer. That's right, this setting already fucking exists in single player. You could also add an additional sound source and set it to not be affected by occlusion. This could represent lower frequencies in real life that aren't easily occluded but don't come through well on speakers. You could add a UI element, kind of like the accessibility option for enemy footsteps in Fortnite. I wouldn't personally use this option, but some people might like the immersion of screen shake or controller vibration. You could implement proximity chat, so even if you can't hear the cav, you're alerted by the screams of frustration of people dying from Ninja Cav.
This is so fucking dumb.
Maybe the best thing about these solutions is that you don't even have to fix the sound occlusion bug, because these all work around occlusion. Anyway, you get the idea. There are heaps of options. Let's move on.
Dearly beloved.
When you crack a fart at your granddad's funeral and it's unexpectedly louder than the weeping of your family, that's something that you have to hold for the rest of your life. But when designing a game, you can make those farts as quiet or as loud as you want. And it seems to me that the sound balance in Bannerlord doesn't sufficiently consider the multiplayer experience. Let's review our earlier example with its actual sound wave. Okay, now let's analyze that same sound wave, but in stereo format. And as we go through this, I want you to keep in mind that the amplitude of the sound wave essentially indicates the perceived loudness of the sound. So here we have the sound of an arrow being fired from about 5 meters away, a shield impact and a dying cry, the hoof strikes of a 500 kilogram 4-legged metal-shoed animal charging at 60 kilometers per hour on hard dirt 2 meters behind me. Obviously bow shots are important, nobody likes a silent camper. Personally, I think the blocks and screams are way too loud, particularly when they're coming from other players, and those players are more than a few meters from your own player. And the volume of the cavalry is just a complete fucking joke for a unit that basically teleports around, destroying lives faster than car loans in the USA. In terms of solutions, get the designer to watch a free 5-minute video from the legendary game designer of Smash Bros., Masahiro Sakurai.
私からのアドバイスとしては、音の優先度や大きさはプレイヤーに大きく関係するものをより大きくするという考え方が合っていると思います。
I'm only half joking with that. I genuinely think that as a starting point, they just need to sit down for 30 minutes and think about how they want to categorize and prioritize sounds, and then pay an intern for a week to adjust all of the curves. Ideally, and I don't know to what extent this already exists in the game, they could implement a priority or volume ducking system for sounds, where lower priority sounds get ducked when the sounds are being emitted simultaneously. If they wanted to go the extra distance, I think it would be ideal for certain sound effects categories, especially cavalry sounds, to be isolated and set as slider options so that players can adjust them to suit their preference. We're going to come back to this graph after we look at some examples, but I just want you to keep in mind that this is a representation of how sound level changes over distance, which some people call sound attenuation. Okay, let's look at an example. Now some of you might look at this and wonder, what's the problem? Good, that means you're still engaged. Please like and subscribe. Ignoring the fact that I got completely robbed with that expo shot, let's have a look at the sound wave again for this example. Noting that there are two horses coming from probably 50 plus meters away, I want you to pay attention to how little the sound increases as they approach, particularly relative to all the other noises. If we draw a line at the amplitude of the sound when they're 50 meters away, and we focus only on the horse sounds, you can see how small the change is in volume as these two 500 kilogram death machines approach. Until our character is literally dead here, the horse sounds are quieter than the knocking of the bolt in the crossbow, and a single player taking damage even though he is further away than both of the horses when he gets hit. I'm not saying that there isn't a difference, because there obviously is, but the difference is inadequate to express the urgency that you're about to be one-shot.
I'm going to die now.
Let's have a quick look at a second example with a cleaner waveform. This is a rare example of the sound occlusion actually working in our favor, as the step change in the volume of the horse was when it was still farther than a bee's dick away. But the joy ends there, because after that you can see that the increase in the horse's volume as it approaches is basically imperceptible until the horse is less than 10 meters away, and then the same applies as it rides away from us until it becomes occluded again. So some of you may be thinking, this sounds like a pretty big problem with no quick fix to be found. And to you I say, let's have a quick look at an example of cavalry running on a wooden ground material. To make this comparison clearer, let's have a look at the sound wave at the boundary of the horse changing material between logs and dirt. So there's obviously a significant difference here. To sum up this problem definition, let's compare some of the sounds on the sound attenuation graph from earlier. Keeping in mind that this is a gamified version of sound attenuation, let's start with some extreme examples to create a range. Firstly, imagining a bee. We start with the bee at its maximum volume. Think about how loud insects are when they're flying right next to your ear, where it remains for only 2 centimeters, which some describe as the minimum distance. The sound level then drastically decreases over a small distance, and then after only 10 meters we reach the bee's maximum distance, which is where the bee is at its minimum volume. The minimum volume might be 0, or it might be set to create an ambient sound until the bee is unloaded from the scene. On the top end of the range, we'll imagine a jet plane. By way of comparison, the plane is at its maximum volume for a much greater minimum distance of 100 meters. This means that as long as you're within 100 meters of it, the plane volume doesn't get any softer as you get further away from it. The gradient for the airplane is then also much shallower than the bee, meaning that it retains more of its maximum volume over a much greater distance. One really important thing to note is that this curve is not suggesting that a bee is as loud as a plane when you're right next to it. The vertical axis of the chart is a percentage of the maximum volume of the sound source. It's not an absolute measure of volume. So the actual volume at the maximum volume might be 70 decibels for the B and 160 decibels for the plane. Now let's insert a curve for the Bannerlord cavalry on timber, which I've approximated by scaling the amplitude of the sound wave in my recordings. And then we have cavalry on dirt. By way of solutions, given that there should already be an attenuation curve for each material that the cavalry runs on, a good start would just be to make the other materials, like dirt and stone, have a similar maximum volume and attenuation curve to the current curve for timber. I don't want to spend much more time on this, but I do want to emphasize to Taleworlds that due to the speed of cavalry in this game, players need at least 3 seconds of warning that cavalry is coming to make a reasonable decision about offense or defense. When a horse is at top speed, this is probably 50 meters. Wrapping things up, we've identified 3 aspects that contribute to a frustrating player experience with cavalry sounds. All 3 of them have numerous solutions, many of them potentially low effort and relatively easy to implement. And now it falls to you, my dear viewer. I'll be leaving a link to the forum post where I'll be posting this video. If you feel passionately about this, please go and leave a +1 or a Taleworlds please, and we'll cross our fingers and hope that they give us something. Hopefully I've done the topic some justice. Apart from some disclaimers at the end of the video, that's it from me. Thank you for watching.
Away with you, vile beggar!